Hello my friends and welcome to today's video. I'm Jeanette with Vivo Vintage Designs. In today's tutorial I am going to show you how I created this really pretty Christmas ornament card. Now this was my first attempt and I forgot to add the shadow before I started painting the inside of the ornament, and then I tried to do it once the paint was dry, but I ended up smudging the little red berries. So I did it for a second time, and here I added a really nice border and I added the shadow, but I thought the shadow was a little too light, so I decided to try it for a third time. For the third time, what I did was I took one of those scissors that gives you different edges. I have a few of them, but for this one I used one that creates kind of like a deckled edge. Here are a couple of the scissors, and this is the one that I used. I'll be sure to list all the products used in the description box, so take a look if you have any questions. And so I cut the watercolor paper, and then I also cut a piece of black Canson watercolor paper. And then I took my gold chrome marker and I painted the edge of each of the pieces of paper just to give it a little extra touch. So once the painting is completed, I will mount the watercolor paper to the black paper, and then I'll use some inexpensive watercolor paper to create the card, because this is a little bit larger than the cards I usually make. I should have measured, but I didn't. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is my watercolor paint. This is paint that I used for a previous painting, and I seldom clean my palettes. I reuse the paint that's in the palette. And the paints that I'm using for this painting are core paints, but of course use whatever you have. And I'll be using 3 different shades of green, some brown, and some red. I'm using a size 0, a size 4, and a size 8 silver black velvet round brushes. I also have a kneadable eraser. I have a little bowl to trace. I have a paper towel and some water. So let's get started. I'm going to take my mechanical pencil and I am going to center the bowl on my piece of paper, and then I am going to trace it. I'm also using a little Payne's Gray mixed with indigo. And you don't have to mix your colors. You can use a light shade of blue, or again the Payne's Gray or indigo, but make sure you water it down. So now that we have our ornament and I've created the string that the ornament is hanging from, we're going to create the shadow, which makes the ornament look kind of round. That's why it's an important part of this painting. So I'm taking my larger brush. This is a size 8. And I am going to wet down the area that I want to add the shadow to. Now the water that I'm adding, I'm going beyond the area where I will be adding paint because I want to get a soft edge. So you can see that I've wet about 1/3 of the ornament at the bottom, making sure to get all the way to that pencil line. And now I'm going to pick up the mix of the indigo and the Payne's Gray, because that's what I had on my palette, but you can use one or the other. And then I'm going to use the tip of my brush and I'm going to go along that pencil line and I'm going to create a shadow. Now here you can see it's really light. I was using what was left in my palette, and that was Payne's Gray. But I do have my Muñoz pan paints in front of me, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of indigo from there. I'm going to mix it with the Payne's Gray just to darken it up a little bit. And you can see that I'm doing almost like a crescent shape where I'm adding the paint. I'm doing it in the shape of a crescent. So it's tapered towards the edges and a little bit wider towards the center. So here I'm just going to pick up a little bit of indigo to darken that color. I added too much water to what remained on my palette, so I need to deepen the color a little bit. And now I'm just going to repeat the same process with a little bit darker color. So now I'm just using the tip of the brush, making sure that I have it right up to that pencil line. And now I'm going to repeat the same process on the top of the ornament as well. Now I've added the shadow to the top and the bottom of the ornament, and you can see how that makes it look a little bit more round. It doesn't make it look like a flat ornament. Now I'm just touching up, making sure that I have it right to that pencil line, and I can get started with my painting. So for the center of the ornament, I'm going to be adding some little pine branches, a little bit of mistletoe, and some holly, and just some twigs and some leaves just to fill it in, but I'm going to use things that remind me of Christmas. So for this part of the painting, I'll be using my two smallest brushes. I have a 0 and a size 4. And I have 3 different greens that you can see I'll be using, and of course use whatever greens you choose. But using small brushes for this is best. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the mistletoe. And to paint the mistletoe, I'm using the tip of the brush to start, and as I pull it along the paper, I'm adding a little bit of pressure and then lifting. And it gives me the perfect shape for a mistletoe. So you can see here, I start with the very tip of the brush, and I add a little bit of pressure and I drag it down, and it gives me the perfect shape. And I'm going to alternate between the 3 greens that I have on my palette, just so that it keeps it a little bit interesting and doesn't make it look so flat. And I'm going to add a couple of these little sprigs of mistletoe here and there in the ball or ornament. And this is pretty simple to do. Now that I've finished adding the mistletoe, we're going to add some branches for the pine branches. So I'm using Van Dyke Brown for this, and I'm using my smallest brush, and just using the tip of the brush, I'm going to draw, or rather paint in my branches. And I like to do these around the edge of the ornament. So very simple, just add a main branch and add a few little branches off of that. Now that I've finished adding my branches, I am going to pick up my lightest shade of green, and again I'm using my smallest brush. This is the size 0. And I'm going to start at the tip of each of these little branches, and I'm going to draw or paint. I keep saying draw. I'm going to paint some very fine little pine needles, and I'm just using the tip of the brush and then just flicking the brush, and I find that that helps me create the perfect little pine needles. So I'm going to go around to each little branch and add these pine needles with my lightest shade of green. When I'm adding these little pine needles, I also add some on the main branch, just to fill it up. So now that I've finished with the lighter green, I've picked up a darker shade of green, and I'm going to add some more pine needles, but with the darker shade of green. And I usually use, I alternate between the greens. I usually use about 3 of them, but you don't have to get that crazy. You can just use 2 different shades of green so that it makes it a little bit more detailed and gives it a little bit more depth. So go around and add your darker green to these little branches, and then we will move on and create some pine cones. Now that I've finished with the pine branches, I am going to create some pine cones, and this is really easy. It looks more difficult than it is. I've picked up a little brown on my brush, and I'm using the smallest brush, and you can see all I'm doing is creating these little lines with the tip of the brush in the shape of a pine cone. Because the painting is so small, all you need is a few lines, and again, it has to be the shape of a pine cone, and it looks like a pine cone. So let me bring you a little bit closer so you can see how I do this. So you can see here, I'm just dotting in almost like a little C-curve line And because it's the shape of a pine cone attached to a pine branch, it looks like a pine cone. So this is really easy. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to add a few of these to, or rather a couple of these to each of the branches. I've added 2 pine cones to each of the branches, and now I'm using my small brush with a little bit of brown to create the, to join the leaves of the mistletoe. And you can see I'm just adding a few little lines to connect everything. And I'll do this for each of these little sprigs of mistletoe. Now I've picked up a little bit of the blue that I used to create the shadow, and I'm adding some very small berries to each of the mistletoe sprigs. And of course you don't have to use blue, you can make your berries red. I'm also going to use the gold marker that I used for the edge. You could also use that to add your little berries. But later on, off camera, I did add a couple of little dots just to fill in some areas that I thought needed a little something. And you'll see that at the end when I post a picture of the finished painting. So you can see I'm just going around and adding a couple of little berries here and there. And for that I use the size 0 brush. Okay, moving right along, now we're going to create some holly. So you can see that I am painting the shape of a leaf, very tiny, and then using the tip of the brush to bring out those pointy little edges that you see on holly leaves. So using the tip of the brush, I apply a little pressure, I create the shape of a leaf, and then using the tip of the brush again, I pull out the paint to create those little pointy edges. And I'm alternating the greens here as well. So while you watch me paint this, I'll remind you that all the products used will be listed in the description box just below the video. So take a look there if you'd like to see what products I'm using. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this video. Your interaction is really helpful and it lets YouTube know that you're enjoying my content, and I really do appreciate it. It's a very nice way to show your support. Also, for those of you who don't know, I have a Facebook group called Vivo Vintage Design Tutorials, where you can post your version of the paintings and techniques learned on this channel. We have a lovely group of members that are incredibly supportive, and you can showcase your paintings there, or if you have any issues, any questions, and you're having difficulties, our members as well as I are always happy to help, and I'm very active in the group. So I hope that you consider joining us there. So you can see now I have added 3 little sprigs of holly. And this is very simple also. Again, just the shape of a leaf, and then use the tip of the brush to pull out those little pointy edges. And once I've finished adding the holly, I'll be using the color, I think it's magenta, but any red will do. And I'm going to add some berries, but I want to wait until that paint dries. Now I see that I have some white area, and I think I need to add a little something more. I also smudged one of my pine cones already. I'm just going to live with it. So see, I'm going to use those little branches with the little red berries just to fill in some of the white area. So I'm using the very tip of the brush. This is the size 4, and I'm going to create a couple of little branches here and there wherever I think I need to fill in some area. Now that I've added all the branches I want, I've picked up some red, and I'm using the tip of the brush to create the little berries for the holly, and I'll use that same color to create the little berries for the branches that I've added. So I'm just going to add a group of these little berries around this branch, and then I'll use the brown to attach them to the branch. So I'm going to go around first and add all my little berries, and then I'll come back and add those branches. Now that I've added all the little berries, I'm using my smallest brush and I'm going around and I'm adding a couple of little leaves to those branches, and again connecting the berries to the branches as well. Just using the very tip of the brush. Okay, so now my little berries are all connected and I've added my leaves. So now I'm going to use my gold chrome marker and I'm going to add the string. I didn't create the loop at the top of the ornament. I decided to just add a little bow with a couple of little strings hanging. And then, I don't know why, but I like to create these little dots on the string that the ornament is hanging from. I just like the way that it looks. And as I mentioned, off camera, I did use that marker to add a few little dots around the ornament where I thought there was a little too much white space. Now, for the previous paintings, I did take a fine liner and I very lightly went around the outside of the ornament to make it stand out a little bit. So I thought to do the same thing for this one, but then once I started to erase the pencil line, I thought that the ornament, the circle, was defined enough, so I decided not to use the fine liner to go around. So here I'm using a little piece of my kneadable eraser, which is perfect for watercolor paper because it doesn't damage it. It's very gentle and it doesn't create that eraser dust. So this is my favorite eraser to use when I'm painting with watercolor. Actually, it's one of my favorite erasers to use for any reason. Okay, so we are nearing the end of the video and the painting is finished. I really love the way that this one turned out. I'm very happy with it. And here are the three that I did. Let me know which one you like better. The one without the shadow, the one with the light shadow, or the one with the darker shadow. I think they all turned out really pretty, but I think that the shadow really adds a lot to it. And here it is against the black, and I love the way that looks. Very happy with this one. Third time's the charm. All right, so let me know what you think about this. And if you have any questions, again, leave it in the comments. I will always get back to you. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out the description box for links to the products used. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye.